Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. To subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platforms, please visit us at www.thewisdomcircle.com.
Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. We thank you all for spending time with us. You keep watching, you keep listening, so we appreciate that. I'm here with my good friend of, he always says 46 years. I think it's only been like 10, but no, it's been well over 46. Ray Warren, where we met in the cubicles. They don't even have cubicles anymore in office spaces.
No, plug and play.
But we've had, I went back and checked this afternoon. We've had well over 30 guests. We've had, a little over 50 shows because sometimes we do two-parters. So we enjoy doing it. It's all meant to give back to those that listen, to share from, yes, a little bit our experiences, but more importantly from our guests. And we're really excited today to have someone in an arena, if you will, maybe I should say from the stage, that we never had. And his name is Eric Simonson. Eric, welcome.
Thank you.
Let me give you a little introduction. Eric is someone who's very involved in both theater, film, and opera. Eric is one of the privileged who is a member of Steppenwolf. And for those that don't follow theater, Steppenwolf was started about 50 years ago. I'll let Eric do a better job of this. From people that have become very big commercially, Gary Sinise and John Malkovich and Laurie Metcalf and many others, with a bunch of young people that decided to do plays probably in the garage somewhere. And Eric was a part of that. He's recently written a book, Between the Lines, that talks about his experience as a young person trying to succeed as an actor and a writer and a director, which are a lot of things we're talking about. So I think it's good for our audience to understand that even, yes, in the arts, the same things that go on in business and sports are very similar. And Eric and I met when I was producing the play Lombardi, and David Marinus, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning writer, knew Eric, respected his work. Eric's from Wisconsin, had written a play about Lombardi with some other characters, and we went to Chicago doing some piece of work for Steppenwolf and sat down with Eric and said, would you consider writing an original play on Lombardi? And that's how our relationship started. And it went on from there to Magic Bird, which Eric wrote, and then wrote Bronx Bombers and directed Bronx Bombers. So we're attached at the hip when it comes to sports plays. And so, and I should mention as a lead-in, he's also an Oscar winner. When 2005, an Oscar for a short film documentary, has also been nominated for Tonys, and I think an Emmy as well, Eric, but you'll correct me if I'm wrong there. So pretty a lot of distinction there. So Eric, welcome, and anything you want to add to that setup of who you are and why people should listen to you?
Oh, I don't know why anybody should listen to me, but I was just listening to your introduction and thinking, I used to be pretty proud of the fact that I'd been able to go into many different fields, as you said, opera and theater and film. But I think if I had to do it all over again, I would have really focused on one thing. I don't know what that one thing might be, but I just feel like gaining sort of like the years of what I know now. It just specialization, I think, especially in this day and age, it might be a more beneficial road to travel. Not sure. But the thing is, the upside is that I've enjoyed what I've been doing because I like going back and forth from one medium to another. I think that if I'm doing a play, if writing a play, and then I work on a television show, one medium informs the other. And I feel like every time I've jumped back and forth, I've grown and gotten better.
It's funny, and then I'm going to pass it on to Ray, is you sort of had a great vision, because sometimes our last question is, what would you tell your younger self? You sort of answered. You sort of answered it in the first 5 minutes.
Oh, that's the regret question, right? Do you have any regrets? It's a hard question. It's a hard question to answer, because if you did ask me that, I don't know if I would have come up with the same answer. I think that who's to know what would happen if I had chosen one profession? I may have been frustrated and quit. I don't know. I think there's so much in this field, especially, that's left to chance and luck.
And then Ray, I'll shut up and let you ask a few questions. But I'm curious, because Ray and I, with other guests, have talked about, how society's gone mobile. You've got people working at home. No one comes into the office, and how does people learn? And so I'm curious, when you were in your early 20s and show up in Chicago and you've got this talent at Steppenwolf, did you learn from each other, or did everyone thought they were the smartest person in the room, and it was sort of competitive? But how did that dynamic work from a collaborative learning standpoint?
Well, the answer is yes and yes. I did learn, and everyone thought they were the smartest person in the room. I think I learned because everyone thought they were the smartest person in the room. But the thing is, and I go into this in my book a little bit, is that at Chicago theater at that time, there was a revolution happening. This is the mid to late 80s and early 90s, which is what I write about in the book. And there was just a seismic movement of new, fresh energy going into theater and film, and you could feel it. It was palpable. And Steppenwolf, I wasn't a member of Steppenwolf when I went there. They had been around for about 10 years, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. I knew that's where I wanted to be. Mm-hmm. And like a heat-seeking missile, I just set all my sights on attaining that goal. And the weird thing about Steppenwolf was it was such a closed shop, because, like you said, John Malkovich, Lloyd Metcalf, Fran Guinan, Jeff Perry, Gary Sinise, Joan Allen. They were all a part of this company, and there was this mystique around them, and nobody knew how to get close to them or how to get into their fold. And I think I just decided that I was going to do my best and not worry about that part. Just, right. Always sort of go towards the Steppenwolf center, but not really make that my agenda, because I think if they knew that I had an agenda, they would sniff that out right away. And it's really about the work. It's not about, those sort of superfluous goals that you want to attain.
That's cool. Great.
Well, great to meet you, and happy birthday.
You too.
We heard.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So, it's interesting, so many things, because you guys had a great exchange there. So I'll probably work backwards from the point about indirect versus direct seeking of goals, right? Mm-hmm. I talk to students on campuses. Tony taught classes. And I've always said, if you think you know where you're going, you're going to be really disappointed, because that's probably not where you're going to wind up. Life's a journey, etc. And so it's about having what you would call your act together. You don't necessarily have to, if you say, I'm going to be a first baseman for the New York Yankees, maybe, but you might wind up being a broadcaster. So I just think the indirect approach is a really smart way to go. And takes that back to your first comment. I don't think there's anyone who's been around long enough. If you haven't been around long enough, you really can't say what you said. And I don't think there's anyone who's been around who doesn't look back and say, I wonder what would have happened if I took this journey or that. I started out at ABC. I left after 8 years. There was 20 guys in front of me who were just as smart and a little bit higher in grade. So I think, wow. And I have friends who stayed there for 40 years, and they did great. And I did great, because I like where I am right now. And I think that's the point you made indirectly, which is I'm happy where, everything that I did, whether or not I would have spent more time, less time, I'm happy where I am. And so I don't know what would have been the right. Did I just dive into opera? Did I just dive into film? Nobody knows when to make that call.
Yeah.
You look back on it, but you can't I don't think you can do it in the moment, right? I mean, that's my
No. I mean, that's. I mean, I don't know if you call it luck, but I think the way I look at it is, if you are a gambler. I'm not a gambler, never have been.
either.
But if you go to the roulette wheel and you just keep on playing whatever you're playing in the gambling casino, eventually you're going to win. But if you walk away from the table, you're not going to win.
Right.
So my philosophy is always just keep on playing, keep on. Let's have another hand of cards. Eventually, something is going to come up. There was a story that I relate in the book about. I think it was about 29 years old, and I had been in Chicago and trying to do theater for about 6 years, and having some success. But having success in theater, and I don't think this has changed much, doesn't mean you're necessarily making a living. I was pretty well known in Chicago in theater circles, and I was getting to do what I love to do, but I was just not making a living.
Right.
And I decided to call it quits. I was with a theater company called Lifeline, and I told them I'm leaving the company, I'm leaving theater. I might go back to graduate school. I don't know in what, but I really need to get serious and put on my big boy pants. And they said goodbye. And then I went home and I got a call from Steppenwolf Theater's casting director saying, we're casting The Grapes of Wrath. It's a big production, biggest we've ever done. Will you please come in and read for the part? And I said, because at that time I was an actor. I'm no longer an actor, although that's what the book is about. But anyway, I thought, what the hell, be my last thing.
Right.
I went in, I auditioned, I got the part, and jumped back in, went right back on the horse again. And from that point on, I had a trajectory that sort of led me to a point of financial stability.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had not gotten that call, if whomever in that office had not thought, oh, let's bring Simonson in, I don't know what I'd be doing right now.
Right.
And I feel like life is like a series of those events. And there is kind of something of a North Star that you have to that has to guide you. But who knows? I make most of my living writing.
Mm-hmm.
I would say about 80% of what I make, maybe more right now, is through writing.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody told me when I was 25 years old I was going to be a writer, I would have laughed. I did not write. I didn't think of myself as a good writer. It was a sort of like a mystery to me how playwrights came up with what they did, but through a series again of accidents and, I think really just sort of like putting in the hours, I was able to do that.
What's important there, Eric, and I believe in this a lot, and I've taught this and we've talked about it, is the young people, you're always being observed. You don't know you're being observed, but you are. How you handle yourself, how you relate to people, how you interconnect. I mean, you and I didn't know who Eric Simonson was. When David Marinus, who knew you, respected what you did, said, come to Chicago and meet Eric Simonson. So it's like, and you didn't, I think we had one little announcement that we were going to do this play on Broadway about Vince Lombardi. But is it fate, or is it connecting with people that say you should talk to Eric? He's the right person to write this play. So there is something about, I think, people sort of at least subconsciously or even consciously saying, how you interact with people and how you present yourself. You may not know when, but some point in your life they may give you a tap on the shoulder.
Yeah, and you reminded me, because if you go back to that meeting in Chicago, and I still remember it very clearly, but I often think of this, which is when David wrote his book, When Pride Still Mattered, and it came out. I'm a Wisconsin fan. I'm a Lombardi freak. I was so happy he wrote that book, and it was so well written and respectful and in depth. I wanted to make that into a play. And I tried to get the rights. I could not get in touch with David Marinus. And I pitched the idea to Milwaukee Repertory Theater, and they kind of hemmed and hawed, as artistic directors do. I mentioned to a playwright friend of mine, Jeffrey Hatcher, who lives in Minneapolis, and he writes a lot of like Sherlock Holmes pieces, and he's a really well-respected playwright. He wrote Female Beauty, which is a costume drama. Tends to find himself in the classical world a lot. Anyway, I had told him how much I wanted to write this play. And one day we were talking and he said, this artistic director of Madison Repertory Theater called me up and asked me if I wanted to do an adaptation of David Marinus's book, When Pride Still Mattered. And I told him, well, if you want them to wear pumpkin pants, I can work something out, but I'm not interested. And I thought, would that something you might be interested in? I said, yes, yes.
That's great.
So he recommended me
That's interesting.
to write that play. And I wrote that play, which we both admit was not going to be a Broadway play ever, because it was sort of like, I think it was rarefied sort of look on and philosophical look on who Lombardi was. But if I had not mentioned that to my friend Jeff Hatcher, he would not have mentioned it to Rick Corey, and I would not have written that play. I would not have met David Marinus. I would not have met you.
I
and my life would have changed.
And Ray and our audience, thank you for indulging us. But I remember somewhere, it was an Italian restaurant, and so I somehow remember spaghetti. That's shocking. Yeah. But Eric at some point said, so you're not talking about this play. You want me to write a new play. And we want you to write it.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
No, that was basically.
Well, you said, do you think you could do that? And my answer was, I think I could write 10 plays about Vince Lombardi.
Well, and again, sort of how life works. And I think these are all lessons for our audience is, David Marinus didn't know Tony Ponturo and Fran Kermser from the whole. I think he met Fran somewhere along the line in one of his pieces of work. And I don't mean to dismiss it that way. I think they did have a acknowledgement of each other. But we said, well, would you trust us with your story, along with Eric and the whole bit? Because we had to have a deal with him as basically the source material of the book from a legal standpoint, although we probably had other ways around it. And he said, well, every one of my books has been sold to a movie studio and no one's done anything with it. So if you guys think you can do a Broadway play, God love you, go. And I don't think he thought we would get to opening night, but we did. And then we couldn't get him out of the theater. I think he moved from Washington up to New York during most of the show and stood there in the theater, sort of like our concierge or maitre d' at the restaurant. So.
Yeah, he's really wonderful, and I respected him so much. I was frightened he wouldn't like what I did with his book, but I'm glad it turned out. Glad it worked out.
So listening to you guys, well, first, Eric, I should tell you that I have two Badgers in my family. Greg and Michael Warren both went to Madison. So.
Oh wow, great school.
Been to pretty great place to be. But the three things. So there's three of us. We talk about. Tony and I decided we didn't want to have a podcast of two guys who just want to talk to each other and went to the same agency and we in the same business. So the circle concept was bringing in the third guest host, and you're that. I've always liked threes. I think there's a lot to be said for threes. I learned it from my landscaper who said, you got to plan three of anything. So, and he was right, actually. So there's something about threes. But the three words that are floating around, and one's not a word, it's a little bit of a term, but impermanence, that's what life is about. Nothing's, I had this great analogy from a golf coach about life is like a river. It's never the same twice. You can't step into the same river twice,
right,
because it's moving. Second thing is chance. You talked about if I hadn't done this, if I hadn't done that. And then the third thing is what Tony mentioned, which is about showing up, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how you call that a one-word item, but how you show up, knowing that nothing's forever, life will change. It's not all under your control. If you think it is, then you're in another universe, because it's not.
Right.
And so it all just kind of comes full circle, no pun intended, on the wisdom circle. The the way your journey seems to have come about. And I wanted to ask you about the move away from acting. So what was it, the pay? Was it just too hard? Because I can't imagine. Tony says, and I don't just, I kind of do disagree with Tony a little bit here. Our business, like you get into a good company that's got a lot of profits and revenue, you can kind of, some people can go get a good long run out of that. Some are more ambitious than others. Some just like the paycheck. Boy, if you're trying to make a living doing what you do, there's no, I mean, I guess unless you become Ted Danson and, you know, you get called into Cheers and then you're just set for life, but you're not doing the work. I don't know how happy he is doing cellular mobile ads. Probably very happy. Paying him $1 million.
I wouldn't mind that paycheck.
but seriously, so like, what was it? Was it the risk? Was it the impermanence? Was it the showing up? Like, what about acting? Just to drill down on your journey, which we love to do with guests, you know, especially someone with your background, which is unique to us in many ways. Tell me about that, or tell us about that, and our audience, who we love.
Well, I don't. It's hard to believe that I ever acted ever. I'm not. I don't have the temperament for it. I enjoyed it, and in fact, I feel like I'm like all I'm doing is plugging my book, but that's actually what the book is about.
Yeah,
it's about my journey into acting. I used acting as a tool in order to get to know people when I came to Chicago. When I came to Chicago, I did not know a soul. I had like one friend who I stayed at his mom's house in a room in the attic until I got a job at the original cookie company on Michigan Avenue to support myself. I lived above the BLUES bar on Halstead, where Big Time Sarah performed nightly. I lived on the third floor and went to sleep to Sweet Home Chicago and Caledonia every single night. That was my existence. So I thought, this is my strategy. If I can't really convince I was a director mainly. I thought of myself as a director of theater. And you can't convince anybody to let them direct at your theater because they don't know your work. You can't show them your work because no one will hire you. It's a catch-22.
Right.
So I thought if I can audition, because at that time there were 100, companies, most of them were non-equity. I was not an equity actor. You can just answer any call and go and audition. And I thought if I can get in a play, I can get to know people, or even like just work in a theater. I'll get to know people. I'll get that way they can trust me with bigger jobs, and maybe eventually I can get a directing job at one of these theater companies. So that was my strategy. And I went in and acted. I auditioned. I got parts in plays. I did exactly what I set out to do, and I got to know these people. So I got to be known as an actor in Chicago. And then more people would call me in and hire me. And then eventually this theater I mentioned before, Lifeline, I became a member of that company, and I convinced them that they should let me direct. So for a while I was directing and acting.
Wow.
Yeah. And then direct acting became my way into Steppenwolf. First I auditioned for their outreach program, their educational outreach program. That's how they got to know me for Grapes of Wrath. Grapes of Wrath is where I hit a wall. I did not have a big part by any extent, by any stretch of the imagination, but it took me to a long run in Chicago, got me my equity card. I went to San Diego at La Jolla. I went to London, performed it there, and then I went to Broadway and performed it there for 6 months. By the time I got to Broadway, and I can't tell you why, I started to come down with the worst case of stage fright.
Wow. After all those performances that you had in your back pocket, more or less.
Yeah, but I think that part of the problem was that the play itself was 3 hours long and had about 50 scenes. I had 6 characters I needed to play. I didn't have many lines. So if I screwed up one of my lines, it would show up huge.
Right.
And I spent a lot of time off. I had a lot of time off stage to think about it.
Right.
So
yeah.
the reason I stopped doing the play on Broadway was because Steppenwolf called me up and said, "Do you want to direct The Secret Rapture in Chicago?" Would be my first main stage or my first big directing gig at Steppenwolf. It was a huge. So I left that and I said, "Goodbye, acting. Good luck, everyone else. You can have my parts. Not that I'm getting them, but." And I didn't act on the stage for 35 years after that. And then I got a call a couple years ago from the casting director of Steppenwolf Theater and said, "We're opening our new space. We're doing Anton Chekhov's The Seagull, and we want to know if you want to play a part in the play, because we're trying to get as many ensemble members in the play as possible." And I said, I have not acted in 35 years. Are you sure you want to do this? They said, "Absolutely." And they trusted me with that. And I thought, why not? Let me take the challenge, and maybe I can overcome this fear of being on the stage that I left behind a long time ago. And in the meantime, Steppenwolf had put a number of new young company members in its company, and I hadn't had a chance to work with them. Some of them I hadn't had a conversation with. Said, "This will get me back into the fold. I can get to know my company better, and I can also maybe be a better director and playwright by doing it." So
how was it? I'm dying to know.
It was terrifying. It was absolutely downright terrifying. But I did eventually calm down in the role, settle into it, and I started to remember and appreciate what I used to love about acting, which is really kind of throwing yourself into a role, convincing yourself that you are this part, and you lose yourself in your fellow actors, and it becomes a communal experience. And that's what Steppenwolf's all about, ensemble acting. It's about the group coming together and becoming one person. And that's where I sort of focused all my energies. And then it became a joy.
It's interesting. It's a quick aside, and obviously I'm not an actor, but I would say twice a year I have a weird dream where I'm an actor about to go on for opening night and I don't know my lines, which I think is, something about being unprepared for whatever I'm really doing.
Yeah.
But it's like, but I don't know my lines. Oh, they'll come to you. You were fine in rehearsal. Yeah, but I don't know my lines. So anyway,
I still have
dreams.
those
Very
dreams.
interesting. You might want to think
That's funny that you should have that dream, Tony. And
it is funny. So Eric, the writing, so it's sort of funny. So, and I think this is really cool for people because what Ray said earlier, which was obvious to the audience, but for some reason I feel I have to put in a quick snapshot. I think what Ray was saying is people in big corporations can hide. They can have a successful 40-year career and hide. Just with a director, actor, writer, you can't hide. It's Eric Simonson. So, and I think we've learned after our corporate careers where we had that big bricks and mortar company around us, what you do now, whether you're consulting or teaching or whatever, it's now your brand. It's now the Ray Warren brand. It's the Tony Ponturo brand. It's not the Anheuser-Busch Telemundo Raycon brand. You always had to be the Eric Simonson brand. So that's an interesting sort of weight on your shoulder. The other thing I think is really important for younger people, a lot of people want to get into theater and write, is I think everyone thinks when you're talking about where you stayed and, starting to audition and just is people think, oh, there's Eric Simonson, 2005, at the Academy Awards accepted an Oscar, but they don't see all the work that goes into it. And I hate when I see some, not all, some young people who want to shortcut the process, but there's really no shortcut. And it's a 40, 50-year process at the end of the day. So anyway, I think it's just a great lesson. And your book, show the cover of your book. This will be the last time we'll hawk it, because I think it's a really great book for anyone. Between the Lines.
Backwards.
No, looks fine to me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, so that's good. Yeah, so it's really a great lesson
Yeah, it's
about
got
perseverance
it's
is really
short, a short book, and the drawings in it are mine. So
oh, there you
that
go.
I
Wow.
And
drew,
you're
I
an
drew
artist.
little doodles that I did, and they're photographs too. So, but
So we
yeah,
Very
so we
cool.
still have some we still have 25 minutes or so, but um I
I
don't
have
know
a
if you want
question.
to talk about your current project, but if you
oh
Wait, wait,
yeah,
do,
wait.
definitely,
Before before we go there,
yeah,
okay.
Ray's going to merge and interrupt. Um, so I'm really interested in the title of your book. And the
yeah.
reason I'm going to ask you about that is I'm reading Who Knew by Barry Diller. And
Oh, right. I want to get to that.
what
Yeah,
I love about the title is, he's a kid who was in the mailroom at William Morris, and he's like, who knew? But he was also a closeted gay man with this
hmm
huge career. And
yeah,
he's like, who knew? Like, I wonder who knew. And
yeah.
so between the lines sounds to me like there's more going on. Tell us how you got to the title, Between the Lines. I love that title.
It is a sort of a double entendre. The subtitle is Steppenwolf, Seagull, and a reluctant actor's journey back to the stage.
Mm.
So between the lines is it's not all what it appears. You have to really dig deep to understand what's going on. And then between the lines is if you read the book, you'll understand that a lot of my fear of being on the stage had to do with forgetting my lines, like in Tony's Dream. you and but except in real
Oh boy.
life. So I didn't have the biggest part in the play, but I still, I was dealing with the double whammy of knowing that I had this phobia from years before when I was 30 years old, but now I'm 63 years old and I'm acting on the stage. So I have that phobia. Plus I have, as you get older, you start remembering things not as well as you used to. So but oddly enough, as like I was overcoming this problem, I I overcompensated. I think that I actually did a lot better at 63 than I ever did it when I was 28 years old and memorizing a play. And there are certain tricks of the trade, but it's really stupid because uh, delivering a good performance is not about memorization.
Right.
But what I did learn was that a lot of actors, not just me, worry about it, and you kind of like have to find a way to get the words out of the way. So that's what between the lines mean. It's like it's not the lines,
Right.
and a big part of the big sort of like you know um, cathartic moment in the story is when my wife was sick and tired of hearing me complain about it, and she said, "Just stop worrying about the lines and worry about your character."
Good advice.
Yeah, it's like you're worrying about the whole, and you should be looking at the donut.
So somebody said to me the other day, and I've heard this more than once, Tony, and I don't know, Eric, if you play golf, but there are people who say it's not about hitting the ball. It's about having a good swing. You just swing. The ball
Yeah,
is there. It's kind of like in the way. But
yeah,
so many people
it's
just focus on the ball that
yeah,
they get all up in their head. If you just focus on your swing and just swing and the ball is in the swing, you're going to play differently. And I just
Yeah.
found that kind of analogous to memorizing lines versus being the character. And, you know,
yeah.
must
Well,
get,
it's like a lot of things in life. It's a little zen or ironic,
yes.
contradictory, because you have to, in order to be good at remembering, you have to forget.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, I
Yeah.
was leading you into whether you wanted to talk about your current. Oh, you probably got three current projects, but the documentary you're working on. I don't know if you want to
Yeah.
talk about that. It's really
Oh, I'd
fascinating.
love to talk about it. Yeah. I live in Glendale, and Glendale is, if you drive directly east of here, you pass Pasadena and Altadena. So we were pretty close to the fires, the Eaton Canyon fires. Most people heard about the Palisade fire, fires, and also the Altadena fires, but Altadena is a completely different community than Pasadena. It's diverse. It's working class, a lot of working class, not many sort of industry people. Um, lot of different kinds of architecture and eclectic, right? Anyway, my son, when we were growing up, went to school there. And because he went to school there, he was allowed to be on the Central Altadena Little League team. And my son Henry is 20 now, so this is like 10 years ago. But we got to know this community and we got to know the people who were involved in the Little League, and we had a great time. So really some of the best memories. So when the fires happened, one of the things that we discovered by just sort of being online was that the Altadena Little League was going to carry on with its season, despite the fact that 90% of its families had been displaced or their houses had burned down.
Mhm.
And I turned to my wife and I said, that'd be a really good documentary. And we were off and running. So I got back in touch with the Little League. I said, I just want to follow you guys and see what happens, maybe do some interviews. And I don't know if anything will come of it, but I think that this is a story that should be told. And they graciously accepted my proposal, and we just started shooting. And I've been following these families and the league for the last 3.5 months. We were there on opening day. We got to know the teams. There are 18 teams in the Little League. It's like, oh my God, how are we going to follow all these teams? 6 T-ball. Then there's Division 2, Division 3.
Right.
There's the premier division is the majors division.
Right.
So when you watch ESPN and you're watching the Little League World Series, that's majors. And they're, I think, 10 to 12-year-olds. I don't know if it might be 11 to 12. But anyway, it's sort of like the prime Little League age, because you can go higher, but those divisions are newer, and they're also competing with travel ball. Anyway, got to know these people. We followed them around. Eventually, we settled on like 3 or 4 teams that we started following. The other thing that we discovered, I already knew actually, was that Central Altadena Little League has not had much success. They are one of the smallest little leagues in the area. And the other leagues around them have been merging, so they have a lot more talent to draw from. And I remember this from when my son was in the Little League. It's like you get to the tournaments, it's kind of like, forget about it. It's one and done.
Right.
And the kids are kind of demoralized. So that was part of the story. It was like, okay, we're going through with the season, but how are the kids going to feel? Because they're losing a lot of their players to the fire and they're a little bit demoralized. How are they going to rise to the challenge? And they won. They won the championship.
It's amazing.
Can't make that up. That's a beautiful thing.
So you in the middle of editing now, I guess?
Yeah. I'm right before this I'm editing a trailer so I can put together and get people sort of jacked up and interested in it. It's about 50 hours worth of footage, so I have to sort through that, and I'm still collecting interviews, but it's a really, especially in this day and age, it's a really inspirational story, and it's a story about people coming through adversity and coming together and relying on each other. And being homeless and finding community in something as simple, as graceful as baseball.
That's great. That's great. We haven't touched yet on your writing skills, although you didn't promote it much in the beginning, said you didn't think you would be a writer. So I'll use this as the entree, and then you can go with it whenever you want. But I would imagine when you were writing Magic Bird and we went out with, I believe, the first draft or so, probably more than the first draft, and sat down with Magic Johnson. I remember doing a reading at a hotel in probably Beverly Hills. What is that like? Because our audience is going to say, they know Magic Johnson's is bigger than life, and you're writing his story and his relationship with Larry Bird. Sort of take us inside that sort of thought process. And is there any intimidation? Is there any expectation? And how do you go about writing a play about someone who's still living.
Yeah, it's not easy. I when we did Lombardi, I never met Paul Horning. I never met Jim Taylor.
Good
I
point.
never
Yep.
met any of the people like Dave Robinson. I met because the guy, you couldn't get rid of him. He was like, he went to every production of that play that ever was.
Wow.
I think, Tony, that we had a hand in getting him in the Hall of Fame. I have
Yeah,
a
I think
feeling that
so.
that might have. But anyway, but I love, I love writing. It's one of the joys of my life is to just sit down and create something from nothing. And Magic was a great collaborator. He understood intuitively that he needed to keep his distance from me, and he trusted me, and I felt that trust. So I wasn't really worried about his reaction because I also felt very strongly about what I had written. And I think, I have flaws as a writer, but I think one of my strengths is that I'm a good mimic. Um, I, 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 I'm able to like size up a real life person, or if I'm making them up, I think of somebody in real life and I try to like reassemble them in print. Um, but I felt like I had a really good handle on him. And, I can't recall specifically how I was feeling. Of course, I'm nervous. It's
Sure.
like, what if he thinks it sucks? What happens then? But you always like go to the worst case scenario, and you think, well, that'll be okay. I'll still be alive. He'll still survive this. But he was good. He was great. I loved working with him, and I think he was really excited about the project and what we came up with. So, but in answer to your question, I am concerned when I'm dealing with people that I haven't collaborated from the start, and then suddenly I have a play and it's being presented, and there they are. What will they approve? Because as a writer, you take artistic license and you invent scenarios, and I think that people instinctively understand this when they're watching a play, that nothing is, nobody was there, like with a listening device, understanding that this was done. People know that's what's happening. But David Marinus, going back to David, he likes to tell this story about, which I forget, right? So I saw David. I organized an event in Wisconsin, in Door County, where we kind of got together and talked about the process of making the play, or making his book into a play.
Right.
And he reminded me of a story that I had forgotten, which was during the preview process of Lombardi. He came up to me and he said, Eric, I was looking at this scene, and that actually isn't what Lombardi said, and that scene actually didn't happen that way. And David said, I took out an imaginary wallet, and I took out from that wallet an imaginary card, and I said to David, you see this? You know what this is? And David said, what? I said, this is my artistic license, and it cannot be revoked.
I gave it to myself, and I renew it.
Yeah, he was probably a tougher, not critic, but a tougher audience than Magic or others.
Yeah.
It was, it's, and then Ray, jump in here, but going back to Lombardi, because we had coaches, we had players, we had family members, we had Bill Curry crying in the theater that he couldn't even talk for the I don't know if you were there that day because you at some point had to do your other work, but he had been he has a little background. He had been the center from Alabama, who was a draft choice for Green Bay, and he just didn't want to listen to anything Lombardi had to say, and he had a really tough relationship with him. But then he got to know him when he was sick, and he got a chance to tell him that he had been a brat as a young person, but he really did learn a lot, and he learned to respect him and appreciated everything he did for him. But he was so emotionally wrought. His wife asked a question, and she goes, "Well, I'm the wife of Bill Curry," and I said, "Well, he must be with you tonight." He goes, "Yeah, he's up there. He's crying. He can't ask
Oh
the
my
question."
God,
But it
I
really
wasn't
got
there.
people. But that's a tough challenge because when you have Paul Horning come and Jim Taylor come and Dave Robinson come and coaches, I remember Frank Gifford when he was still alive said to Dan, I think we had 232 performances, and Dan, of course, didn't miss one. And Dan, towards the end, started to maybe exaggerate a little bit, probably just to keep his own energy up. Uh, and Frank said to him after the show, he said, "You were great, Dan, but I just want you to know, Lombardi really wasn't a yeller. He had a strong voice and he got his attention, but he really wasn't a yeller." You could see Dan's sort of a.
Is that shrink it like Fred Flintstone?
I
Wilma,
said
Wilma.
I remember saying to him, "Dan, of course me, what do I know?" It's like, "Dan, you're not Jackie Gleason, jumping up
Yeah.
and down in the honeymoon. You're Vince Lombardi." Anyway, uh,
where I was really kind of like hesitant or was hopeful that somebody didn't come was with Bronx Bombers and Reggie Jackson. I don't think he ever saw the play, did he?
I don't think so.
I heard that somebody talked to him and said he had no intention of coming, but because that play in that scene that we had in that, I think it was like a 50-minute scene with like not a break, and it was such a vitriolic argument that was going on, and that I would have been really nervous if he had come, because a lot of that was, I mean, it was based on a real life incident of a hotel room meeting between him and Billy Martin and Thurman Munson and Yogi Berra, but a lot of it was invented, sort of like capturing the spirit, the essence of what I think happened.
Yeah.
On the other hand, now I'm regretting that he wasn't there, because I would have liked to hear what he had
He had
to
a
say.
reaction. Oh, we had Yogi there, which was a fun experience. But
Yeah.
Ray, jump in here before our time runs out.
Yeah, no, well, it's funny because I was just listening. Good podcast. I was thinking about the journey and the early Eric. A lot of not a lot, but some of our guests have suggested that they wish they had gone a little slower and been a little more patient with themselves. Do you think that was something that you would reflect on, or do you feel like, you know what, I was doing everything I could do, and I had 3 different kind of buckets I was trying to fill, and here I am? Or did you feel like did you give each of them the amount of time and attention, or again, looking back, which we all get to do, what would you say was your flow?
Well, I feel like I'm working at 2 speeds, and they're diametrically opposed to one another. I've always felt like I was a late bloomer. Like everything that came to me about 5-10 years later than everyone. Like I didn't get into a writer's room until I was 50, I think. And most writers, start in writer's room when they're in their late 20s or early 30s, or
Right.
the latest like 40 years old. But I had always wanted to do, that's something I always wanted to do. And this is part and parcel with like trying to do, wear too many hats. But even like in theater, I felt like it took me a while to get started. So by the time I was there, I was ready. And what I mean by 2 speeds is that once I was there and I was ready and I got what I wanted, I was so enthusiastic and wanting, just passionate about what I was doing, that I would go too fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I would make mistakes. Now that's the part that I regret. I don't regret having come to some of these dinner parties too late, because by the time I got there, I was prepared. But
Right.
I do regret, and I still have to watch myself with this. I still regret jumping the gun on some sort of wanting things to be so great so soon that I rushed and didn't take the time to make sure that the sculpture was finished or whatever.
Right. I think that Tony and I have talked about this with the Gen Zs, and X's, and millennial, all of it. I mean, all of it. When you think about it, Tony, everybody we've had have all had a similar. So I think it might be human nature. It's more than behavioral. I think it's more nature, because I think everybody wants it faster, and when they get it, they just run hard because they got it and they want to keep it. So, that is a kind of a common theme, that I just find interesting with someone, again, totally. Most of the folks we've had on have been from, some have been in just general business, but they've all been in business, not arts, I would say, for the most part.
You know,
Great.
what's interesting to me is that times are changing so rapidly right now, and I feel like it's, it's really important that you change with the times, but sometimes it's hard to determine how you should change.
Mm-hmm.
And because things around you are moving so fast, I mean, I want to move slower.
Mm-hmm.
And more deliberately. I know that everyone is isolating more and zooming more, and I used to go into do pitch meetings all the time. You'd get a free bottle of water, you'd sit down, you'd chat with people, you get to see how they work, how they move, you get to see their environment, their working environment.
Right.
I hardly ever go out to a meeting now, and I miss that a lot. And I think I'm in the minority. I really do think I'm in the minority, and I'm stubbornly not willing to change. I feel like we're losing a lot in not being able to sit across the table from one another.
Yeah.
There's so much to be gained by that, and I didn't think I was a social animal, but I think I am a social animal. I think
Yes.
that I just don't do well when I'm just working with myself all alone for long periods of time.
Social animals.
Yeah, I don't know how you build a culture and the collaboration with people. I mean, I believe in it totally. This human interaction is important, and the separation is not good at the end of the day.
It's
Yeah,
not
I just
healthy.
and I just think about Lombardi and the other shows and the culture at Anheuser-Busch. I feel I'm very fortunate, but you create a sense of community, and everyone respects each other, and you're working together to a mutual goal, and then that's a life experience that you always keep with you. I mean, you and I can go back to a rehearsal room of Lombardi like it was yesterday, or the opening night,
Yeah,
or
same,
the
same.
whole bit, and that's an experience that money can't buy, and
Right.
so it's pretty key. Ray, you're always good. We're sort of at time for a wrap up, and although I think we've worked it in pretty, we've integrated as go. But you're pretty good at those last three questions, so I'm going to let you take us home.
I was about to give you the 2-minute warning, which I usually give me the 2-minute warning, but I think the 2-minute warning is appropriate, Eric. I mean, we want to first thank you for coming in. I think that
My pleasure.
it's been really, really fascinating. We didn't touch on opera, which is fascinating. We didn't. So I really do feel like we've had a very thorough conversation. I'm not sure I have anything more. I've been popping in with title of the book, what's it like to be doing three things,
Yeah.
etc. So, so here's the question I would ask though. Tony did ask you about the um, Altadena project.
Mhm.
What else have you got and why?
I think something that's been taking up a lot of my time has been a arts festival that I've been working on for the last. Now we're in our ninth season, but it's called the Door Kinetic Arts Festival. It takes place in Door County, Wisconsin, every year for 1 week, and we invite all sorts of different kinds of artists, dancers, theater people, film people. We have a magician this year. We just invite them up to Door County. We give them this great lodge by 400 acres of lakefront property to create, incubate their space, and then they present them for the public. And the only reason I bring this up is because it is taking up a lot of my time, more time than used to. It started out as kind of a hobby, but it's starting to turn a corner. And we're getting a staff together, and our budget is increased by 3, and we're getting more and more attention. So I'm just sort of like seeing what's going to happen with this. We're going to hit our 10th anniversary next year. We want to make it a destination festival. So that's kind of like taking up a lot of my time. Outside of that, I've got a film project that I'm working on that's top secret. So sorry, I can't tell you what it's about.
So then, Eric, the last question, which is, if someone said to you, okay, you can't write, you can't act, you can't direct, what's an area or what's a talent you think you would have had fun in if you couldn't have done those 3 things?
I would. I also wanted to be an architect.
Okay.
I don't know. I love building things. I was a guy who built tree houses that had trapdoors and secret, passages. And judging from what I know about architects training and what architects actually do in real life, I don't know if I would like that. I can see myself at a drafting board or in front of a computer screen for 24 hours a day. I think if somebody would let me design a house in the way that Frank Lloyd Wright would design a house, not his style, but Frank Lloyd Wright would come in and he'd take full charge, and the couple he was designing for would say, well, we want a house, a roof that looks like this. And he'd go, well, yeah, but I'm not going to build you that. And you just have to trust me. That's, I think I would be that great as that kind of architect. I don't think that exists many places in the world, but I always thought that would be fun.
That's cool. Well, Eric, thank you very much.
Sure.
Time is precious, and we appreciate
Time is fleeting.
Yeah, exactly. Good luck with everything. I know we'll stay in touch. Thanks. And hope you're having a nice birthday dinner somewhere.
I hope so too.
That's the way to go.
We'll see what happens. I'm having a great birthday so far, but I appreciate it. Ray, it was so nice to meet you.
It was a pleasure.
And Tony, it's always great to talk to you.
Same here. Great. Thanks for everything.